The Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Subcommittee will come to order. I want to welcome everyone to this morning's hearing to discuss federal investments in neuroscience and neurotechnology. Our ranking member, Mr. Fattah, has been a champion in Congress on this very important issue. For many years, it's been my privilege to work with Mr. Fattah, my predecessor, Frank Wolf, on this very important topic, and I thank him for encouraging us to have this hearing today. I would like to welcome our witnesses this morning, Dr. Joe Handelsman, Associate Director for Science at the Office of Science and Technology Policy. We're delighted to have you with us here this morning. Dr. Handelsman, thank you. And Dr. James Olds, the Assistant Director for Biological Sciences at the National Science Foundation. And Zack Lynch, Executive Director of the Neurotechnology Industry Organization. And Dr. Stephen Hyman, Director of the Stanley Center for Psychiatric Research at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. We look forward to your testimony on this vitally important and emerging field with exciting new developments taking place all the time, and I thank you sincerely, Mr. Fattah, for helping put this together and making this possible and keeping the focus of this committee on this cutting edge and extraordinarily important research. I look forward to your remarks, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just note that in this discussion about the operations of the Congress and bipartisanship, that this entire effort has been bipartisan from the beginning. And this hearing is further evidence of it because the chairman is in a very tight window, allowed us to go forward from where we were last year, where we had our first ever hearing in the appropriations process on neuroscience work, to continue that this year. I want to thank you, but it is not surprising because the chairman and I worked together on another subcommittee where we did some very, very important work on brain health in terms of veterans when he previously chaired the Veterans and Military Construction Subcommittee. And we worked together and made major investments through the VA and epilepsy centers for excellence and post-traumatic stress and suicide prevention and on and on and on. And the VA obviously was one of the entities that, departments that worked with the interagency working group. So I want to welcome our witnesses. We've done a lot in this committee since 2011 when we created the interagency working group, and we are now working aggressively. We've doubled the amount of dollars through the National Science Foundation focused on this after the creation of what is called a budget theme and the understanding of the brain. We're going to hear more about that today. And in last year's appropriations bill, moved to include an important element of the nation's scientific enterprise, our national labs, working with the National Science Foundation on the development of a national brain observatory. So I'm excited. We're going to hear about where we are with the brain initiative in terms of mapping of the brain. We're going to hear a lot from your testimony today. And again, I thank the chairman because he he's got a lot of interest in terms of space exploration, but it is no way had him step back from a commitment to make sure that we keep our eyes focused on the greatest scientific mystery that we know of, which is how our brains, which controls everything else, actually function. And so I thank the chairman and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Fattah. This is an extraordinarily exciting subject. We're honored and privileged to have each one of you with us here today to help keep us apprised of the cutting-edge work that's being done in the United States and elsewhere in the world. And we will, of course, enter your written statement into the record without objection and would welcome you to summarize your statement as best you can. Thank you. We'll start with you, Dr. Handelsman. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Culberson, Ranking Member Fattah, and members of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity to speak today on the federal investments in neuroscience and neurotechnology. The White House and OSTP support several neuroscience and mental health activities, including the Interagency Working Group in Neuroscience, the BRAIN Initiative, the National Alzheimer's Project, the initiatives to tackle mental health issues affecting veterans, service members, and military families. Diverse sectors of the American population face risks related to brain health, from concussions in athletes to Alzheimer's in the elderly. Recent studies estimate that as many as 5.1 million Americans age 65 or older have Alzheimer's. 18% of service members returning from Iraq and Afghanistan have PTSD or depression. And each year, approximately 2.5 million civilians in the U.S. sustain a traumatic brain injury. Scientists have been exploring the underlying nature of these brain disorders with the hope of developing preventive strategies, treatments, and perhaps cures. One obstacle has been the absence of sufficiently sensitive neurotechnologies to see with precision what's happening inside the active brain. The Obama administration's BRAIN initiative intends to help overcome this particular obstacle. Since its launch in 2013, the BRAIN initiative has grown to include investments from 5 federal agencies, NSF, DARPA, IARPA, NIH, and FDA. These agencies have refined the goals of the BRAIN initiative, developed funding opportunities, and awarded initial grants. Dr. Olds will share with you some of the exciting work at NSF. Work funded by other agencies is focusing on recording activity in the human nervous system, enhancing and developing new neuroimaging technologies, fostering developments in data handling and advanced analytics, and understanding and capturing the brain's computational abilities. Federal investments are the foundation of the BRAIN initiative, but completion of the broad goals of this initiative will require complementary efforts by a variety of organizations outside the federal government. To date, private sector partners have made commitments totaling over $500 million in just the first 2 years of the initiative. But federal engagement in neuroscience is much broader than just the BRAIN initiative. With the encouragement of Congress, including members of this committee, an interagency working group on neuroscience was established in 2012 to coordinate neuroscience research across the federal government and identify opportunities for international collaboration and communication. The Neuroscience Working Group includes representatives from more than 20 federal agencies and departments that have interests in neuroscience research. Describe some of the working group's interagency coordination activities in my written testimony. With regard to international collaboration, for example, last month the National Institute on Aging and its HHS sister agencies convened a follow-up to the 2013 G8 Dementia Summit, at which international partnerships for interdisciplinary research on the causes, prevention, and treatment of Alzheimer's were discussed. Also, NSF and NIH, in collaboration with German, French, and Israeli science organizations, have jointly funded collaborative research in computational neuroscience to facilitate international sharing of brain experimental data as well as analysis tools. On the domestic front, great strides have been made over the past year in mental health care for our service members, veterans, and their families, including improvements in continuity of mental health care and mobilization of community clinicians and peer counselors to increase access to services and to assist in suicide prevention. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here today. While there's still certainly much to be done to meet the needs of Americans facing neurological disorders and diseases, the federal investments are already making progress toward improving our understanding of the underlying neuroscience that will lead to preventive strategies and treatments. And I thank the committee for its continued leadership and vigorous support for these issues, and of course I'll be pleased to answer questions of the members.
Thank you very much, Dr. Handelsman. Dr. Olds, we're looking forward to hearing from you. And, not only is your work so important on helping veterans and traumatic brain injury, it's also, I think, relevant and be interesting to know what, if at some point during the questioning you might be able to offer us any insight about how would you potentially spot someone like this pilot of the German aircraft that might be on the brink of doing something terrible that looks like his deliberate act. And it may indeed be work that is done by scientists like yourselves that might be able to help airlines spot something like that about to happen. So we'll look forward to your testimony, Dr. Olds. Thank you.
Chairman Culberson, Ranking Member Fatah, and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on this important topic. My name is Jim Olds, and I am the Assistant Director for Biological Sciences at the National Science Foundation. I am on leave from George Mason University, where I'm a professor of neuroscience. Today, I will outline the NSF's focus on understanding the brain. I hope to make 3 overarching points. First, the brain may be the most complicated system that we know of in the universe. It is a big data problem. Second, neurotechnology has advanced neurobiology to the point where we can explore new questions that were previously unapproachable. And third, understanding the brain is an international effort that is bigger than one country and requires coordinated resources. Mr. Chairman, historically, significant advances in brain research have resulted from broad areas of research in neuroscience and related fields. However, there remains much to be discovered if we are to achieve a comprehensive understanding of how the healthy brain's structural organization and dynamic activities produce cognition and behavior, and how the brain can recover functions lost to disease or injury. Allow me to share one example. The current state-of-the-art non-invasive functional brain scanning technology is off by a factor of 1,000 when it comes to resolving the actual neural code of human brains, both in time and space. If we are going to truly understand the brain, we are going to need a next generation of tools that will allow us to resolve the brain function at the speed of thought. In its fiscal year 2016 budget request, NSF initiated Understanding the Brain, a multi-year effort that combines cognitive science and neuroscience activities with NSF's participation in the Brain Initiative. NSF's overall goal with this activity is to enable the scientific understanding of the full complexity of the brain in action and in context. Understanding the brain will draw on existing research investments to foster greater collaboration and to accelerate fundamental research. We will invest in neuroscience, cognitive science, neuroengineering, and the neural basis of learning and how the brain adapts to changing environments. NSF is requesting $144 million in fiscal year 2016 for our investments in understanding the brain. This almost doubles NSF's historical investment and builds on $92 million awarded in fiscal year 2014. In April of 2013, President Obama announced the Multi-Agency Brain Initiative. I know that Congress was very much involved in its creation, and I want to specifically acknowledge and thank this committee's foresight in this matter. Since its creation, NSF has targeted significant funding for the Brain Initiative. This is an exciting time because neurotechnology advances are allowing us to pursue an understanding of the brain that was opaque to us in the past. NSF is uniquely positioned to advance research on understanding the brain by bringing together a wide range of scientific and engineering disciplines, each of which brings its own unique perspective to the brain challenge. NSF has been consistently a catalyst for transformative breakthroughs. For instance, I mentioned earlier that the limit on functional imaging technology in representing brain activity. Just this past year, NSF funded a novel project to develop a new generation of brain measurement technologies, and if successful, this will transform our ability to observe the dynamic activity in living brains. This is a great example of how rapidly NSF works to accelerate discovery. In fiscal year 2014, 5 NSF directorates invested $11 million in 36 highly interdisciplinary proof-of-concept awards called EAGRs that focused on neural circuit function. These strategic investments in fundamental research and infrastructure will transform our understanding of the brain, reveal the neural basis of thought and behavior, and show how to maintain a healthy brain throughout our lives. To close, I want to note that understanding the brain is an international challenge that is bigger than one country. Just as modern physics needs CERN, the largest particle physics laboratory in the world, neuroscience needs internationally coordinated resources. This includes creating the ability to share the vast amounts of data that will be generated by the challenge. I thank this committee for recognizing the size of the brain challenge and encouraging NSF to work not only with other agencies but other nations. NSF will continue to work with multiple partners and stakeholders to address important gaps in our knowledge and to enable scientists working across disciplines, institutions, and nations to collect, share, and analyze the new data that will reveal the biological principles that produce the functioning human brain. Our goal, as always, is to provide the best possible science for the country. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify and for your attention.
Dr. Olds, thank you very much. As we go through the, in your opening statements, I'd particularly be grateful, and we'll certainly do some of this in the questioning as well. Talk to us about some of the successes. We're very supportive of the investment. That's why we're here today. Very supportive of the collaboration That's why we're here today. Really appreciate the work that you're doing. Delighted to hear about the collaboration and the money that's been invested in the past and that needs to be invested in the future. We're supportive of that. That's why we're here today. Tell us about some of the exciting new discoveries. I mean, that's what we really want to hear about today, and what's working and what's not, and where then do we need to focus our attention, as you could, if you don't mind, in your opening statement. We'll get into that in some of the questions too, but I'd love to hear it in the opening. Thank you. Mr. Lynch?
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Fattah, members of the subcommittee, I'm Zack Lynch. I'm the founder and executive director of the Neurotechnology Industry Organization, and I thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today on behalf of NIO on how to maximize the societal return on federal investments in neuroscience research. NIO is a nonprofit trade association that works to accelerate the development of treatments and cures for brain-related illnesses. With over 100 members, NIO represents emerging neuroscience companies, academic brain research institutes, and patient advocacy groups across the United States and the world. Today, more than 100 million Americans suffer from a brain-related illness. That's 1 in 3. These include Alzheimer's, autism, addiction, depression, epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, schizophrenia, stroke, and many more. They also include post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury, which disproportionately affect members of our armed services. The combined economic burden of all these diseases has reached over $1 trillion a year in the United States alone. And this economic burden is accelerating as the population ages and expands, creating unprecedented demand for new treatments to cure neurological diseases and psychiatric illnesses. Now, in neuroscience, federally funded research has always provided the scientific foundation upon which the private sector builds the next generation of therapeutic products. The National Institutes of Health continues to be the largest and most innovative funder of basic neuroscience worldwide. This investment in brain science and the SBIR program is critical for ensuring that the pipeline of neuroscience innovation remains robust. Accordingly, NIO requests that Congress appropriate at least $30.7 billion for the NIH in fiscal year 2016. This 2.2% increase keeps real purchasing power flat, adjusting only for an increase in the Biomedical Research and Development Price Index. When it comes to the brain, however, we must do more than simply fund basic neuroscience research. We must improve public health, we must stimulate broad economic growth, and we must create new jobs. 2 years ago, recognizing both the unique challenge and opportunity in neuroscience, President Obama launched the BRAIN Initiative. This ambitious effort aims to invigorate investment in neuroscience in much the same way that the Human Genome Project and the National Nanotechnology have done previously. Our industry is tremendously excited and optimistic about this program and its prospects to spur innovation, and we thank Congressman Fattah for his continued efforts in this initiative. I think it is most important to note that unlike any other area of life science research, investing in neuroscience will create direct economic benefits far beyond just reducing healthcare costs and alleviating human suffering. Let me give you 2 brief examples. Information technology, a multi-trillion-dollar-a-year industry that sits on the cusp of being transformed by brain-inspired computing. Neuroscientists are researching the human brain for clues on how to design computers that can modify their hardware and software in real time and modify themselves based on experience, just like the human brain does, as well as create radically efficient computers. The human brain runs on less electricity than a single light bulb. This area of cognitive computing represents a competitive advantage for American companies and will significantly impact economic growth and job creation and national security if we choose to invest wisely today. Education. Total expenditures in education have reached over $1 trillion a year, and yet the results are not helping our citizens remain globally competitive. Neuroscience can help us leapfrog this education performance gap by developing fully personalized learning systems that tap into our natural neuroplasticity we can safely accelerate learning, knowledge creation, and innovation. Now, looking forward, the convergence of neurogaming and neuromodulation with advances in self-learning computing will open up an entirely new realm of value creation, of purely digital experiences that can be created and consumed with virtually no impact on global physical resources. For example, one could sell virtual experiences complete with emotional stimulation with unique landscapes or immersive health environments that enhance mental well-being. NIO believes that the BRAIN initiative can and should play an essential role in accelerating the translation and commercialization of breakthrough neurotechnology. Accordingly, we ask that Congress allocate $300 million to the BRAIN initiative in fiscal year 2016. Additionally, we recommend the consideration of a budget-neutral program modeled in the Orphan Drug Act which will increase private investment into much-needed treatments for neurological and neurodegenerative diseases. Investing in neuroscience offers both treatments to terrible diseases, but also a grand opportunity for economic revitalization and dramatic improvements in individual resiliency. Today's neuroscience funding is inadequate if we want to lead the 21st century and beyond. I call on your subcommittee to strengthen our commitment to neuroscience funding to take advantage of the opportunities associated with the brain. I'm confident that this approach will provide new treatments to terrible brain-related illnesses, transform industries, and create entirely new economic drivers for growth and jobs if we invest properly. Thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to take questions when you open it up to the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Fascinating. Cognitive computing is exciting, but I share some of the fear of others and the idea of artificial intelligence. We want to avoid a Skynet situation. Dr. Hyman, thank you. Look forward to hearing from you.
Chairman Culberson, Ranking Member Fatah, members of the subcommittee, my name is Stephen Hyman, and I'm offering this testimony both in my capacity as President of the Society for Neuroscience and as a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I'm also Director of the Stanley Center for Psychiatric Research at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard, and serve as Harvard University Distinguished Service Professor of Stem Cell and Regenerative Biology. The mission of the Society for Neuroscience is to advance understanding of the brain and the nervous system. The AAAS, of course, has a broader mandate, led now by newly installed CEO Rush Holt, which is to advance science and engineering and innovation throughout the world for the benefit of people. On behalf of both organizations, I deeply thank you for your support for neuroscience research and for the opportunity to testify here. In order to be responsive to the chairman, I will, instead of summarizing my remarks, I will try to put in context some of the advances that have come from the kind of funding we've had, if you will also forgive me for the errors which will undoubtedly crop up from spontaneity. I think something to put these needed successes in context is probably well known to all of you, but that is not just the economic cost or the numbers created by brain disorders. 1 in 3 Americans is a very good number, but the impact. So while brain disorders can kill, stroke kills, and tragically suicide remains among the 3 leading causes of death for young people in this country. Most of the damage done by brain disorders is through disability, whether it's a child with autism who, if they're at the more challenging end of the spectrum, may never succeed in education and won't be able to work in ordinary circumstances. Schizophrenia, which is perhaps relevant to the incident with the aircraft that you referenced. We don't know yet what was going on. But particularly cruel because onset is in late teens or early 20s, just when families and society have made a maximum investment in a young person, getting them through college or technical school, and then they become essentially disabled for the rest of their lives. And our treatments are better than nothing, to be sure, but there's much to remain desired. And of course, Alzheimer's disease has been referenced already. But again, we're facing a catastrophe here, not only in terms of the individuals, but also caregivers and families who get removed from the workforce. Now, the problem, and I think Dr. Old said this very well, has been that the brain is not only complex, but I would add one other factor, which is required technological advance, which is it's inaccessible in life. Cancer is a very hard problem, but we neuroscientists would say, perhaps unfairly, that it's an easier hard problem because a surgeon does an excisional biopsy and hands the scientist the disease. Whereas for the human brain, which is poorly modeled in animals in many cases, not all cases, especially the thinking parts of the brain, we can't reach in and take tissue. And so we have to examine the brain indirectly, which is why some of these imaging initiatives are so important. That said, based on basic science and tools and technologies that have emerged in the last few years, there's been, to my mind, really breathtaking progress. It hasn't yet led to treatments that generalize, but I think we finally are beginning to see a path. Let me give you just a few examples of these successes. So for autism and schizophrenia, these were very mysterious illnesses. We could do brain imaging, but again, exactly as Dr. Old said, we're really looking only at ensembles of millions of neurons firing. We're not seeing what's actually going wrong. We've always known these disorders run in families. I mean, they don't, they were not like Mendel's peas. It's not like, in any family, if one sibling has it, the other will have it. It skips generations and so forth. But we've known that these are highly genetically influenced illnesses. The problem for common illnesses is that they are not caused by a single gene creating a problematic mutation, as in the case of Huntington's disease, but many hundreds of genes contributing small effects. We had no possibility of detecting these. What's happened because of really the federal investment in research across NSF, NIH, Department of Energy, is that the cost of sequencing DNA has come down about 1 million-fold in the last decade. It's really quite remarkable. Everyone's heard of Moore's law about transistors on a chip. The cost of sequencing DNA makes that look rather torpid. Where I work now, the cost of a whole human genome is between $1,000 and $2,000. And I would add, the bill we pay to Amazon for putting the data in the cloud is $500. So these costs are converging, and we need our colleagues to improve some of the computing. But the point is, based on this technology, we can now afford to and accurately study many tens of thousands of patients. And as a result, the community has created durable global collaborations. And as a result, we now have the first literally 110 genes that are involved in causing schizophrenia. Now, these are early clues, and there will be many more, and it's very hard to put them to work. But all of a sudden, we've gone from a complete black box to light at the end of the tunnel, and pharmaceutical industry, which has fled this area as too difficult, is now starting to dip their toes back in the water. One other really interesting example is something called optogenetics. Optogenetics is a tool in which one can, using, say, an injected viral vector in the brain of an animal, or even making a transgenic animal, another fantastic technology, introduce an ion channel that comes from microorganisms and invertebrates, so something discovered in basic science. And then these channels get activated by light. I mean, all of us know our houseplants, move toward the light. What's the mechanism? There are all of these kinds of light-sensitive channels in nature. But we can exploit this with fiber optics to control, to turn on and turn off the cells in the brains of animals and begin to really understand how circuits are working. And this has absolutely, in the last 3 or 4 years, revolutionized our understanding in animal models of behavior. And while we're not going to put fiber optic devices in human brains, it has also inspired a number of investigators, undoubtedly funded by both NSF and NIH, but also involved with the DARPA aspects of the BRAIN project, to think about how these principles might apply to human diseases, Parkinson's disease, and other diseases where we've begun to know the circuitry. It's a really exciting time, and I would just end by saying that one of the things that the BRAIN project does, which I think I'm really very I've been in the government, but I'm really pleased with how the government has worked on this, has created a bottom-up endeavor that is going to build new tools, because we need these tools and technologies to get inside our skulls, literally, and engage these broadly for science, but also ultimately in the service of human health, and also will bring new kinds of thinkers into all of our portfolios, people who've been funded perhaps by the Department of Energy, who've never thought about biology or the brain before. And so I absolutely, on behalf of the organizations I represent, and also personally, thank you for your support of these endeavors. And I'd be delighted to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hyman. It is an extraordinarily exciting field of research, and it is, you think about the size of the human genome and how little we know about what those genes do. We don't know what over 90, what's the percent, what percentage of the genes in the genome do we know what they
Well,
even
you know,
do?
that's even a tricky question, because often, you know, nature reuses the same gene in different cell types for different purposes, and so even where we know one or two purposes, we often don't know what they're doing in the brain. We understand best the 1% to 2% of the genome that codes for the protein building blocks of cells. The rest, which when I was in college we were told was junk, is actually quite busy. And we're just at the earliest stages of understanding what the other 98% of the genome is doing.
I suspect God doesn't do anything that doesn't have a purpose. I suspect
Yeah, that's a very good maxim to live by. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely fascinating. I noted also, and you didn't mention this in your summary, Mr. Lynch, about the importance of us making sure that we've got legislation encouraging companies to invest in orphan drugs, which is something you mentioned obliquely, but
Yes.
really, really important, because a lot of these medications and these problems involve populations that may be too small for the companies to be able to see that there's an economic benefit, and that's just vitally important. Some studies have mentioned that many neurological disorders stem from a misfolding of a protein in the brain, which can lead to a cascade of effects that result in ALS or Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other neurological diseases. And traumatic brain injuries apparently also cause a similar misfolding of proteins with a cascading effect in the brain. Has it been solidly established that this protein malfunction is a potential root cause of these neurological diseases? And if we have indeed identified the root cause of these issues, could you tell us where we are in finding a cure and being able to either stop or reverse the cascade effect in the brain when these proteins misfold?
It's really quite clear. I mean, proteins, first of all, you know, come out, they're read out as a linear structure, and then there are all of these mechanisms inside the cell to make sure they have exactly the right conformation to do their job.
And then some of the folding, I understand, is just a result of random chance about where they are positioned in the cell. They don't have enough elbow room to fold.
You should teach
correctly.
biology. I mean, that's exactly, and then, but it gets stabilized depending on where negative and positive charges are. You know, they'll bounce around stochastically, and then they'll come to the right conformation. And there are other proteins called chaperones, which help them, you know, stay in the right conformation. This is a complex process that often fails. And normal cells must have a mechanism to degrade and remove these misfolded proteins.
So complex, in fact, you've had to crowdsource it. I've signed up for that project to do the
That's great.
protein folding,
Yeah,
let the computer
yeah.
run it in the background, and
Yeah,
you've really got
no,
to...
no, it's
I also
great.
signed up for the one classifying galaxies, which is
Well, yeah.
that's what I do for fun.
Well, the forces
But it
that
is
shape galaxies.
so
Yeah.
vast a problem, you literally... I'm
Yeah.
sorry, please
Yeah,
go
no,
ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I was going to say, gravity works for galaxies, doesn't work at that
But I mean, the
scale.
scale of the problem is so huge.
Yeah.
Crowdsourcing is one of the
Yes,
best ways in the size of the...
Yeah. There are a lot of quantitatively talented people who might be spending their lives in finance who, you know, could really, you know, in their extra time, do some really good things here, thinking about protein folding and other problems. But at any rate, you're absolutely right. It's been extremely frustrating to take one example, that the gene that causes Huntington's disease, which is rare but not, you know, terribly, terribly rare, invariably lethal, with a terrible end course, or some forms of some of the familial forms of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis.
Sister-in-law's family has it.
Well, right, so you know, I don't have to tell you how awful these conditions are.
She's clear, but her sister did not.
Yeah, so, so again, technological innovation has given us, I don't want to overpromise, but I think has given us some really promising clues. So you can think of these mutations that cause protein misfolding or other mischief.
Or injury.
Or injury as poisons in every cell. And the idea that a drug will work in all the, now in ALS, of course, it's really motor neurons, but they're affecting other cells. The fact that the idea that you could sort of somehow neutralize this poison with a drug is very challenging. A new idea based on the ability to deliver RNA molecules which would interfere with translating from the DNA message these aberrant proteins that the mutant form of Huntington or some of these familial forms of genes that cause ALS, and literally try to shut that gene off in the brain or in motor neurons is an entirely new, last year or two, this idea of gene silencing, which I think is a, unproven but a really interesting idea. But we couldn't think about it without the technological advance of how would we get these neutralizing molecules into the right cells. Still an unsolved problem, but something probably some of your members might even be thinking about.
The poison you're referring to could also be thought of, I guess, in terms perhaps of like inflammation. I've been a subscriber to the journals Nature and Science for over 20 years and don't pretend to understand all of it, but I read them cover to cover.
I don't understand.
And but it's fascinating, and noted that there was an article I know a year or two ago about the effects of chronic inflammation as a root cause of cancer, for example, as just a constant source of irritation or causing damage that then triggers an uncontrollable cascading mutation of cells. Is that similar to what you're talking about here?
Well,
Conceptually.
it's conceptually similar. I think in familial ALS and Huntington's, there's actually a very precise target, which is this mutated gene that's leading to these terrible symptoms and death. And we can at least know exactly what we need to shut off. Whereas in inflammatory disorders, there are many molecules involved, and
But to prevent the inflammation is to prevent the underlying.
yeah, that's correct. Absolutely.
The
Absolutely.
subsequent
Yes, absolutely
problem.
right. Absolutely right.
One of my other passions, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Fattah, a long-term passion of mine that I hope in the time I'm privileged to chair this subcommittee and work with you and all our other members, is to be able to identify in the future a genetic problem like that in an unborn child through the amniotic fluid, and whip up a protein fix that you could then inject back into the amniotic fluid, which the child would then breathe and
So if
repair and cure the child's disease before she's born.
So
That's absolutely possible, isn't
Yes,
it?
Mr. Chairman, if my colleagues, maybe they want me to quiet down, but there's yet another exciting technology called CRISPR-Cas9. Well, I'll explain what this is. So
CRISPR?
CRISPR, CRISPR hyphen CAS9. And it's in the news because leading scientists have said we'd better call a halt on any human experimentation right now, see where we are ethically and in terms of safety, which is not to end the research. But let me describe what this is. Bacteria get infections too. Viruses invade them and kill them. And so bacteria need to have an immune system. And what they do is in some cases, is they form a memory of, they don't want to cut up their own DNA, so they form a memory of the DNA of the viruses that afflict them. And they've invented basically molecular scissors to cut the DNA that gets recognized. We as a community
When that DNA shows up, the molecular scissors go into action
right,
and
so,
chop it
right,
up.
something binds to it. Yeah.
Zombie immune system.
Well, that's it.
That's nice.
I'll adapt
You oughta
that.
use that.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you plagiarize
Mr.
that?
Fattah, if that's not copyrighted,
Zombie immune system. That's good. Yeah. Zombie immune system.
But basically, we can now use the same system, and this is now widely used in both microorganisms and animal models, to cut DNA where we want, because we can engineer the recognition strips, these so-called guide RNAs. and cut DNA. And then there are other well-known mechanisms to insert new pieces of DNA. So this is now an experimental tool that we're using to put the genes we discover about schizophrenia into cell lines. But the idea is that in a human, potentially, and again, this is really fraught and it's really early, you could do pre-gestational diagnosis. You could find the mutant gene for monogenic disorders like familial Huntington's are caused by a single gene.
Right.
You could design guide RNAs. You could cut out that version and replace it with a healthy version. Now, there are all kinds of safety risks. There are all kinds of ethical risks because people might want to use this technology to make people taller or whatever, and we really have to think deeply about this. But I think we're entering an era where exactly what you've imagined may become possible.
Texas Medical Center, which I'm proud to
Yeah,
represent,
yes.
I've been pushing them for years on this,
Yes.
and they tell me it's possible.
Absolutely, and I think
exciting
that's a
stuff.
great institution.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me take so much time, Mr. Fattah.
Mr. Chairman, no, thank you for your interest in these and all matters science. So you can see my chairman is engaged. So it's very important. I want to make sure we go back because you, in order to respond to the chairman, you kind of ad-libbed your remarks. And I want to make sure that we put on the record, this is a very important part of our process, hearings and public record, the scientific challenge in front of us. So the human brain, as best as we understand, about 100 billion neurons, 100 trillion connections. It runs on low electricity, and it does a lot, and we don't understand much of it. Is that
It's electricity
Dr.
with a light
Olds?
bulb,
Right?
I would say that we're very good as stamp collectors right now.
Right.
And we're working diligently on coming up with a theoretical framing for a rule set for how those 100 billion neurons, each with about
I went out to Stanford and met with one of your colleagues, Dr. Newsom. He says, you know, if we're talking about looking at a map, we don't see the highways, the roads, we don't really have a good understanding. And even if we did, we don't understand the traffic that's on there, right?
Or why the road goes where it goes.
So Paul Allen came into Philly, he announced a major investment into a cell institute. Now, he's already put $500 million into a brain institute. The cell institute is to look at the 50+ trillion cells in the human body. But one of the things, the reason I was there, it was in Philly, but the reason I was there was that in the cells in the brain, we don't yet know all of the cells in the brain and the cell types. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. So a simplifying approach to understanding the brain is to take the 100 billion cells and classify them into their different types.
Right.
And we're in the process of doing that, but
But we're not there yet.
we're not there yet.
Right. So because I want the chairman just to work with me here. So we got a system in which there's a lot of interactions with these in the neuronal network that we don't understand, and we don't understand even the basics, the kind of identification of all the cells. So, the effort here is one of from just a task. It's a gigantic task, right? So one of the things that the committee did in last year's bill was we did move to internationalize and to create collaborations, and we've tasked the National Science Foundation with developing an international conference, because there's these efforts, and the committee has supported my work. We, whether it's Israel or the EU and others, to try to kind of gobble together. The EU has now put €1.5 billion on the table for the Human Brain Project, Henry Markram. There are a lot of interest in trying to work together, because there are, based on the World Health Organization's number, over 1 billion human beings with a neurological disease or disorders, right? So, and the contention is that, at least as I approach this, is that we need a basic understanding of how a healthy brain would function, as at least part and parcel to trying to figure out what to do about some of the challenges. So, as the National Science Foundation is understanding the brain, we saw the eager grants, which were great, and we see your request this year. The basic next steps, as you see it, with where we need to go. If you could talk to the chairman and I about that in terms of the cost side, right? So, we know on the health side, we spend a lot of money. We spent $210 billion last year on care for Alzheimer's, right? So I know we spent a lot of money. We spent $500 billion on mobility challenged Americans. So these are people who have suffered from stroke or some traumatic brain injury and so we're spending a lot on the care side. We're spending a paltry amount of money on trying to figure out any of this. And the way I would phrase it, Mr. Chairman, is the Allen Institute, which has spent $500 million, they've now completed an essential framework for how the mouse's brain works, right? And there's about 1 million neurons?
No, 10.
10 million, right? But so they got this thing. So that's about where we are. 10 million versus this 100 billion, and that's a mouse. And the translation from animal to human is about 1% in neuroscience. Different from in all other areas, it's about 50%. So you can find a cure in an animal 50% of the time. It'll work in a human being. When you talk about the brain, it's 1% translation. So even when you find something that makes a mouse, operate a little bit better, restore memory, whatever, you can't bet the ranch that you're going to be able to translate it to a human being. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. So talk to the chairman about where we need to be going over the next, me and him are going to be here for the next 10 years doing this. And we want to see at the end of this, or sooner, major relief for these families who have these challenges, right? We also are interested in the science and the sexiness of this, but at the heart of this is human beings, 1 billion of them worldwide, 100 million in our own country. And so talk to us about how you see us, not just this year, but over the next period of time here, what we need to try to get done.
Yeah, where we need to focus our efforts. That's a great question, probably the best question.
To make disruptive progress.
Yes.
So in June, we're going to be engaging in something called an Ideas Lab in collaboration with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, intramural campus at Genelia Farm, just across the river.
Where?
Genelia Farm of Howard Hughes Medical Institute. It's just north of the Dulles runway. And the goal of that meeting is to pull together scientists from disparate fields to crack a very simple circuit in the brain, the olfactory circuit. It's one of the most ancient circuits in the brain. It's conserved across evolution. It's tractable from an engineering standpoint because the sense of smell doesn't go through a relay nucleus like the rest of our sensations do. And the goal is to take a very simple circuit, bring together scientists from a wide variety of disciplines, and crack that simple mechanism as a proof of
Can you yield
concept.
for a second,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, please.
I was just at the Weizmann Institute in Tel Aviv, well, in Israel, and right outside of Tel Aviv, and they just created this, they've been working on this bionic nose with some funding from the National Science Foundation. These 6 million neurons that are right up here, they're below the blood-brain barrier. So they're very interested. Neuroscientists are very interested in them because they can reach them. But this nose is, at Penn, at University of Penn, they developed some ability of getting dogs to sniff out cancer. So they've been able to get this bionic nose to sniff cancer. And also explosives and illegal narcotics, and it's fascinating. But go right ahead.
So the next steps would be to actually understand how more complicated circuits work. This olfactory circuit is a relatively simple one. There are more complicated circuits, such as the mammalian hippocampus, that play a critical role, for example, in Alzheimer's disease. When we catch Alzheimer's disease, the cells of the hippocampus die, and that's the same circuit that allows us to remember episodic memories, the movie of your life, if you will. That's a devastating symptom. It's a circuit that we know an awful lot about. The inputs and outputs are not as well known as with the olfactory circuit, but it's a circuit that's tractable, and it would be a logical next step. So the goal is to actually...
Good God, no, it's not still. It is.
My brother found a way to put it back in me. I don't want it.
No, you don't. No, because Michael and Lucy are hate-banging it as we speak.
Can you help me?
Oh, yes. The question is, will I?
Set your terms.
I'll do it for free.
Free. Why?
Well, you seem like a capable young man. I'd love to have you in my debt. And I have to say, I'm not a fan of your brother, so screwing him would delight me. Anyway, to business. The spell, yes. So finding the ingredients should be easy enough, but there's one tricky part, however.
Okay.
You need to scar your vessel.
Meaning what?
Meaning something that so pollutes it, it renders it uninhabitable. Calls for something very specific.
Great. What?
Patricide.
My dad's been dead for years.
To be clear, you need the blood of your father, but your father needn't be blood. Comprende?
People trying to figure out, treatments, and where do you see America at relative to the development of the technology, the neurotechnology industry?
Well, thank you for that question. I'd like to return in answering you to the point you were trying to make earlier, which is these are exceedingly complex problems we're trying to solve. And to Dr. Hyman's points earlier, much of the breakthroughs that we are talking about that he articulated, whether it was neurogenomics, CRISPR-Cas9, optogenetics, those were all born out of the federal investment in the Human Genome Project, right? And so what we're talking about here is how are we actually going to solve these problems with the brain and develop treatments and cures for individuals who are suffering and alleviate these problems that are occurring with these families and the drag on the economy as a whole. We need to invest in fundamental brain research, in the Brain Initiative. We need to step it up and push forward. So what I represent is the neurotechnology industry. There are currently 800 companies worldwide right now that are developing treatments for neurological diseases and psychiatric illnesses. About 450 of those reside in the United States itself. Last year, this industry generated about $150 billion in revenue in and of itself. That includes selling pharmaceuticals for anxiety, depression, epilepsy, multiple sclerosis. So there is a big pharma element to this industry. But the breakthroughs, they have basically left the R in neuroscience aside because of the hyper-complexity associated with developing these new treatments, and are looking to these gentlemen to actually find some new technology so that we can get some insight into how we're going to develop these next generation treatments. So from the venture capital side, we've been hosting a neurotech investing and partnering conference for 10 years now. And each year it brings together, a modest number of companies, 250 people, 50 companies pitching their treatments, to try and get venture capital funding. And what we've seen over the past decade is a continuous increase in the interest of venture capital to fund these companies. Now it's up to about $1.5 billion a year across about 120 deals last year, okay? But the problem that we're beginning to see...
What Potomac was saying is that if America misses the boat here, it's kind of lights out. That this is like the area in which, the next wealth building, phase in the world is going to operate in.
I couldn't agree with you more. Humanity has progressed through an agricultural revolution, an industrial revolution, and we're in the midst of an information revolution. And the next revolution, the technological revolution that will transform how we all work, live, and play on a daily basis will be the neurotechnology revolution. It will impact our laws, how we do marketing, how we entertain ourselves, how we treat each other, how we provide new ways for people to experience life. and it will impact every industry in different ways and create new industries like neurotainment, right? Completely new forms of entertaining, far beyond the therapeutic impact that it will have on
One of the other jurisdictions we have is the Commerce Department. So I've spoken with the Commerce Secretary when she was here.
Yes.
About Commerce developing a neurotechnology focus so that we can make sure that American industry is focused on this trade space in ways that we need to, and she's agreed to do that. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back to you.
And a big part of this is the cognitive computing, I guess, that you mentioned earlier. Let me ask Dr. Olds, if I could, on behalf of the National Science Foundation, to talk to us about the number of grant proposals you received in the neuroscience discipline, and of those that you received, how many does the NSF fund? Just ballpark, and give us, Mr. Fatah, an idea of where the most productive areas might be for us to help you target.
So I can give you now ballpark numbers on the number of awards that we have given per year. So from 2009 to 2013, where we were spending approximately $70 million a year, we were making on the order of 150 to 200 awards per year. In 2014, we awarded in the neighborhood of 250 awards. In 2015, this year, we expect to award something like 300. And if the appropriation that the President requested for 2016 comes through, that would be about 400 awards. On the number of proposals, I would need to get back to the committee on that, and I will.
Ballpark percentage that you're able to.
I would say we can fund about 20%, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% of the proposals.
Mr. Chairman, you were asking about breakthroughs earlier. Let me interrupt your train of thought and tell you
That's the benefit of this, is free flowing.
something that you'll be excited about. So Keith Black, who's the head of neurosurgery at Cedars-Sinai, is doing some research that showed that you can use a part of the venom from a scorpion to that will only attaches to non-healthy cells in the brain, and it allows the surgeon to now just go in and pluck out the tumor that otherwise is hard to discern. So this is where nature, you were talking about God's sense of humor, whereas nature and its, you know, so there's a lot going on out there, but this was a fascinating piece. I knew you'd be, you know.
I do love that kind of stuff. It is fascinating.
So I wanted to share that with you.
It is absolutely
I'm going to send you the paper. They're doing clinical trials now, so we're working out quite well.
Right.
So they can, you know, and Senator Kennedy, we know lots of people who've had these brain tumors not to a good result. But this particular technique enables the surgeon, by utilizing something called Chlorotin 35, which is part of the venom from an actual scorpion spider. It kind of lights up the runway, you know, for the snippers to come, you know. So.
Fascinating. It is extraordinary, and the advances come from y'all sparking off each other, so I know how important the collaboration is, and you really often don't know where the advance is going to come, and it is up to the federal government to invest in this basic research, because the private sector just either cannot, they just simply don't have the resources. You can't stay with it. You've got to make sure your shareholders' expectations are met in the shorter term, so it's up to us to invest a lot of these. It may just turn out to be dead-end rabbit trails, but otherwise wouldn't get done. I wanted to ask Dr. Olds about supercomputing, and National Science Foundation had funded Blue Waters, one of the most powerful supercomputers in the world. And if you could talk to us about how this resource is being used to support brain research, and how is the United States holding up in the ongoing effort to build the biggest, fastest, best computer on Earth?
So
Japanese leapfrogged us, I know, recently, but I just want to make sure we're the ones staying at the cutting edge of that work.
So thank you for the question. That's two questions. I'm going to answer the first one first and the
Okay.
second one second. Blue Waters, of course, is one of the most powerful supercomputers in the world. It's hosted in Illinois at the National Center for Supercomputing. In the area of neuroscience, it's being used in a number of really exciting areas. One is brain imaging, where it's improving the resolution of blood flow imaging, which is really important in diagnosing stroke and ischemia in the brain. It's also being used to elucidate the structure of ion channels, which Dr. Hyman mentioned earlier. These are critically important. These ion channels have three-dimensional shapes, which is critical to their function and how they interact with neurotransmitters and drugs. And so Blue Waters is being used for that. It's being used to simulate and model the process of vesicle fusion to the membrane presynaptically. That's involved in neurotransmission. If you don't have neurotransmitter being released from the membrane, then you do not have communication between cells. And then, to me, one of the most exciting areas that Blue Waters is working on has to do with gene expression in the brain in the context of Alzheimer's disease. We've been talking about misfolded proteins in Alzheimer's disease. But really, the important thing to think about Alzheimer's disease is to think about that there are about 8,000 brain-specific genes that are expressed in the brain. And these genes, you can think of their expression across all the brain cells as being a dynamic network which is under exquisite control. When we're healthy, that network is operating in one mode. When we have a disease like Alzheimer's, it's operating in another node that we may require supercomputing to actually understand. So Blue Waters is being used in that context, and I think that's really important. Getting back to the question of how we're doing in terms of supercomputing, I just go back to what Mr. Lynch was talking about. You know, we have a proof of concept, an existence proof in the human brain, that we can have real high-performance computing, exascale computing, if you will, on 20 watts of electricity. So there's something about the architecture of what's in here that's fundamentally different from what's in, the laptop computer. If we could understand that, I think it would be a gigantic step forward in terms of having a permanent lead in high-performance computing.
How do we deal with once a computer becomes self-aware and can learn? You mentioned cognitive computing. It opens up all kinds of wonderful possibilities, but also terrifying possibilities as well. Talk to us a little bit about, if you could, each one of us, that some of your personal concerns about how we are going to deal with that when we cross that threshold.
Yeah.
Some of the greatest minds
Yes.
in the country continue to talk about the concern about AI. It may not be a happy experience.
Mr. Chairman, I think there are a lot of technologies that we focus on, all for benefit, for therapeutic purposes, to solve important engineering problems that have other uses that we wouldn't be so happy with, or that we worry might get away from us. And maybe the earliest experience of this country in thinking about that is nuclear proliferation, which is, after all, knowledge of certain advanced technologies. And we can see the challenges there, but I think the challenges are going to be even greater because these are going to be widely disseminated, not classified technologies. And one of the things that I've actually been involved in is to help people thinking about inventing these technologies, not AI, but invasive deep brain stimulation for regulating behavior. So DARPA has these very interesting advanced projects really aimed at servicemen and women who have traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, but also chronic pain syndromes, who may have become addicted to pain medicines because of their injuries. And as an alternative to waiting for the development of new medications, they're studying the ability to directly stimulate circuits in the brain, something that's worked very, very well for Parkinson's disease. But they understand that once you're stimulating brain circuits, this could be a good and therapeutic thing, but it also could change personality, personal identity. So they've appointed an ethical, legal, and social issues panel to help them oversee this research that I'm privileged to serve on, and they take it quite seriously. But I think it's a kind of model. The Genome Project did that. They had a ethical, legal, and social issues panel that actually James Watson had initiated. And the idea here is not to stop these technologies because they have so much benefit, but really as a community to think through the really difficult problem of maximizing the benefit, but somehow controlling the risks.
It's kind of like, I mean, not to minimize, but it's just like everything else. I mean, it's like the automobile, you know, if used for its purpose, fine, and that's why I think OSTP at the origins of this effort with the interagency working group put together a ethics group. I know the president, Amy Gutman, was involved, and some others. So, you know, it's a big concern. However, as Newt Gingrich said, it's the bigger, larger challenge for the country is if we can't delay Alzheimer's by 5 or 6 years, you know, we're going to go bankrupt. I mean, if, you know,
No.
we got to figure out our way forward, and we got to make sure that people don't misuse the technology. And that's why, yeah.
You know, that's why we're here, very
Right.
supportive of the work.
Yeah.
But I just think with
Yeah.
your talent at this table, it's important to talk about the ethical challenges and what would lie ahead for the human race if we actually develop a computer that is able to function at the level of the human brain, can learn, adapt.
But to get closer to your line, there are issues here that are useful for us from a intelligence standpoint and other things for national security that are also beneficial, and it's closer to the line you're concerned about, but have some utility.
Well, that day's coming
Yeah.
soon, and we've got the talent, a great panel of great talent here. Just let me get your thoughts on it, about AI and cognitive computing, and what are we going to do when we hit that threshold?
Sure. I mean, with any new technologies, there's both promise and peril. And we need to have extreme vigilance as these technologies come to market and are being researched. I personally know right now that IBM, Facebook, Google, HP, Qualcomm, all the major chip makers around the world, some of the major software companies are hiring neuroscientists because they see the competitive advantage that brain-inspired computing can actually bring to their organization. So in a way, you know, the cat's kind of out of the bag, and we need to have these public conversations around
Right.
what are the limits to these technologies and how do we design them in initially.
They've just called a vote, and I want to make sure, let Mr. Fatah close up on this, but I really would also like to ask about what is this device and the instant gratification that it brings to doing to our kids and the evolution of our minds, because this is changing us. And the human instinct for instant gratification, you see the Google searches, if people don't get what they find within a few nanoseconds, they're switching. It's altering behavior, and I think it's really worrisome. Can you talk to us a little about that? Any one of you want to dive in?
So Nicholas Carr wrote a book recently, I think it was called Is Google Ruining Us? And
Well, in particular, these things.
right. And I
Hit it with a hammer.
I think that he raised the point that as we become used to answering questions instantly without thinking about them intellectually, that would change the plasticity of our neural circuits and that potentially would produce some long-term change. As I told Mr. Carr at the time, he was researching his book, I would be skeptical about that, and I think we really need to actually look at the evidence very carefully with regard to long-term changes in human brains as a result of the IT revolution that's going on.
Physical changes, what about behavioral? And I will let Mr. Fatah close up on this, but, I mean, he's got me another question. But it worries the heck out of me, because you don't see kids playing in the yard anymore, looking for bugs or doing things like they should, all normal kids should be.
I agree.
I mean, just to take one, I mean, you're absolutely right. And again, we're not very good at having broad conversations about how to control the downside of technologies. We're all too good at sometimes having deadening regulation. You know, you're not going to outlaw, you know, email or iPhones, but we have to deal with cyberbullying, right? And so I think we really need to have more serious conversations that somehow affect the way society handles these issues, or things that are really beneficial and wonderful will then have very much unintended consequences.
You're seeing changes in human behavior.
Yeah,
After this instant access to information, the gratification.
If I may, I think this is an example of why we need research in social, behavioral, and economic sciences, as well as the basic biological research, because this is an area clearly where we're looking at complex human behavior as it interacts with machines, and that would be SBE.
It's a social behavior headline. No one
Let me jump on the more positive side of this for a minute. So, you know, I was out at the, in the Napa Valley, the Staglins. They had a son who had some challenges with schizophrenia. And since that time, he's doing great, but they engaged themselves in this effort and have raised a lot of money, over $250 million of private money, to particularly for schizophrenia-related research. And they fund early science, early investigators. And part of what seems to be emerging as part of some of their research is that some of this gaming activity can be therapeutically useful.
Oh, no question.
And that part of the challenge is not the totality of the challenge, but part of the challenges of some of these young people, it's almost always young people who face these schizophrenic circumstances, and almost always boys, not in every circumstance, but more so than not, that, getting the brain functioning slightly more efficiently by activity actually provides some benefit. And then I was out in Tom Cole's backyard at the University of Oklahoma's got a program a center called K20. And they were developing these games that my teenager likes, these Sims games, but embedding in the game, things that we would want, interest in STEM education and going to college and, hiding these notions in nuanced sort of ways inside the game so that even if the kids are playing them, they're getting indoctrinated with positive messages. So I think that, some of this we're going to have to run with and just try to improve as we go, Mr. Chairman. But I do want to, as we go to wrap up, I want to thank the chairman again because it is not the norm that in a minority situation that there will be a hearing like this, and I want to thank you. But it just shows that the interest in this matter is not partisan, and we intend, well beyond this administration, which has got, 20 more months and has done some important work, but this is work that we're going to be engaged in for a long time going forward that we need to deal with, and we need to deal with on all of the fronts. We didn't talk a lot about traumatic brain injury today, but we have close to 3 million Americans. I'm not talking about service members now. 3 million, a lot of them young people, not all of them, but, riding their bikes, playing games, who end up with very serious injuries. And the things that we thought we knew about traumatic brain injuries in the past, we now know differently, and there's a lot more that can be done. And this is an area where we want to do, but we need to also look at, because it's very different from the disease side. These are actually, we had our own colleague who was shot in the head, Congresswoman Giffords. And, in past circumstances, you wouldn't see the kind of recovery that's happened. But, it's because of the great work that's being done. But we need to work in this space more. And I know that the chairman and I did some work on this on the veterans side. But this is on the civilian side, it's a very important issue too. So I want to thank the chairman, I want to thank our guests, and we're going to cast some votes.
This is a team effort.
It's a team effort, and we're going to keep going. All right.
It's so important, and it is something we are arm in arm on. As I've been a member of the subcommittee since I first got on appropriations in 2003, and always dreamed of having the privilege of being able to chair it, to be able to help make sure that these, as Mr. Jefferson said, he liked the dreams of the future better than the memories of the past, and I will continue to do everything I can to help make sure that these dreams of the future come true from our work that we do arm in
Together,
arm. And
right.
Remembering also, Mr. Jefferson liked to say that liberty is the firstborn child of science, which is absolutely true. So it's exciting and so worthwhile, and we'll continue to work together, Chaka, to make sure that we're providing you the research, the support that you need, and get out of the way as much as possible. Because as a Texan, we also understand that the less government, the better. and get out of the way. And particularly when it comes to the sciences, let you follow the facts.
And let me thank OSTP for shepherding this, and you've done a great job, and Dr. Rubin and Dr. Hogan and the team there, because this is a massive enterprise stretching across both the government and the private sector, and private foundations and academia and hospitals. I mean, there's just a lot of people, including people focused on ethics, who have to be part of this. So thank you, and
Thank you for making this happen.
somehow I think we might be having another hearing on neuroscience next year this time in the appropriations process. Thank you, Mr.
Maybe
Chairman.
not sooner. Thank you very much, and the hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.